Hello, I'm James, and this is Chapter 3, Perceiving the Self and Others. Let's jump right into what we're going to be covering today. First, we're going to be describing our own personal perspective on the world uh, and how that then influences our communication. We'll explain how we use and misuse schemas when communicating with others, define attributions we use to explain behavior, and create meaning for behavior, describe cultural differences that influence perception, identify how our self concept, who we think we are, influences our communication with others and with ourselves, and describe how our cognitions about ourselves and our behavior affect communication with others. So let's jump right in with what does perception have to do with communication and why learn about perception? First, when we are in decoding messages, this is going through our lens of perception. So we want to be sure that we're improving this lens. Not to mention that it is completely natural for us to have perceptions that may be false. So, how do we remove these? By improving and learning about perception in total, so that we are not so that we remove some of those false perceptions, but also moving forward that we have better perceptions. There's a very common analogy of people who that three people who are blind go and touch an elephant. One says they think they're holding a spear. The other one says it's a snake. The other person says it's a tree. The other person says it's a wall, and another person says it's a rope. That's more than three. But the point is that due to our own worldview, it is understandable that we may have false perceptions about certain things. So we need to improve them. Perception helps us make sense of the world. It is a cognitive process through which we interpret our experiences and form unique understandings. This is a four-step process where we select certain information. We choose what to take in. Then we organize our perceptions around that. There may be certain perceptions of what is ugly, what is beautiful, what is right, what is wrong. And if you place certain information into that wrong category, then that changes the way we perceive it. Also, we may interpret perceptions differently, and then we want to be sure that we are improving our perceptions. Communication processing is us gathering, organizing, and evaluating information we receive. This is how we perceive. The way that we, so first, the way we, what's one of the big challenges of selecting information is that we may select some information, we may not select some information. Think to those people who, maybe just don't listen to your arguments in regards to whatever you are arguing. They are not selecting the information, therefore they are not having perception on that information. Makes sense. Now, when we talk about organizing information, we involve schemas. Schemas are mental structures that put together related bits of information. So, schema can also change due to new or conflicting information, and schemas help us understand how things work or should work. So, if I touch a stove, what do I automatically get? It's cold. Therefore, and it's kind of greasy. So I create the mental structure, the interconnected bits of information, touching the stove, fun. Then I do it more and I do it more. Then all of a sudden my parents turn on the stove and I then touch the stove, hot. Due to this new information and conflicting information, I now know I've now organized my perception around that, and therefore I now have changed that schema. This works in much more persistent ways. Examples of this could be how people interact with the justice system. That someone who may have only had good experiences with the justice system would then say, okay, justice system is good. Whereas someone either due to their own actions or even to not from their own actions, if they have a negative uh, interaction with the justice system, then they may organize that perception differently. And this is all based in schemas. Those two interrelated bits of information are different. Schemas also evolve and change over time. We have something called interaction appearance theory, where if we interact with someone more, they will appear to be more attractive to us. This does not necessarily mean physically, although it can be physical, but it's also more about if I interact with this person more, they may be more attractive as a friend, potentially. We also have challenges of schemas. This could involve mindlessness, selective perception, distorted perception, and even undue influence. Again, schemas are interrelated bits of information, and there are challenges to schemas because we may rely either too heavily on this or we may use it in a way that is not effective. First, we go into mindlessness, and this is where we rely on schemas too much. Mindlessness is processing information passively, which helps in handling transactions automatically. This may be, guess what? When I am in the at the checkout clerk at the grocery store, I am not working at full capacity. I'm mindlessly handling this interaction. This can be problematic, though, when we mindlessly process information, it can lead us into either dangerous situations where we think things are okay if I walk down this dark alley, or it could even be, oh, let me just handle this this situation mindlessly. Oh no, I locked my keys in my car. Have you ever had an experience where you're like, I'm closing the door, I'm locking the keys in my car, I'm locking the keys in my car, and I still shut the door, and I'm like, oh my God, I left the keys in my car. Again, we want to be sure that we will end up engaging in some transaction mindlessly, but we have to be sure that we are trying to avoid this. Also, we have selective perception. Selective perception is paying attention to information that is consistent with our existing schemas. It is active, not passive, like mindlessness. So, for example, if I feel like all LA drivers are bad drivers, then I will pay attention to this information that is consistent with my existing schema, LA drivers being bad drivers. And therefore, I will now pay more attention to this, and all of the rest of the drivers around me in LA, I do not pay as much mind. This is selective perception, and this happens a lot. Another good example of this could be if you are a Democrat or a Republican. You may pay attention to all the good things that the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate does, and as a result, and if you pay attention to this and selectively perceive this exclusively without taking in other information, this could very easily fall into this selective perception. Then we have distorted perception. Strong feelings can tend to distort what is being seen. This is when you are experiencing road rage. Have you ever felt just like so angry or just frustrated about your day, and then all of a sudden all you're seeing are all the bad things that are happening around you? This is distorted perception. We can tend to and because we already have this feeling, or this strong feeling, it distorts what's being seen. Also, we tend to judge events based off of vivid information. Does anyone fear skydiving? Of course, I fear skydiving. But obviously, as we all, I'm sure, know, that it is, we are a lot less likely to die in a skydiving accident than on the road, or even more so, obesity. So it is, so due to the vivid information of someone falling without a parachute and dying, of course that's going to hold more more of our perception because of the vivid imagery of it. This could also be translated to threats of terrorist attacks. And as a result of that information being vivid, we would have more, we may believe that we may be more susceptible to that fate than to a fate that is more simple and boring of obesity or a car crash. And then also we have undue influences. Undue influences is when you give greater credibility or importance to something shown or said than should be the case. This is where we fall into celebrity endorsements, where Hulk Hogan's doing pasta, John Cena's doing Fruity Pebbles, and OJ doing Hertz. Obviously, we may give these people greater credibility due to our schema of understanding where they are coming from. From John Cena and from Hulk Hogan, we see them from these wrestling programs, and as a result, I then give them more credibility because I like them in those programs. Whereas, and I mean, I guess OJ back in the day was seen as a great football player, and people had very positive feelings about him. And as a result, when Hertz, that if we have positive feelings about OJ, then we may also have positive feelings about Hertz, until he ended up doing the things that he did, and that was the end of that. And this is actually where one of the big drawbacks to celebrity endorsements, that if a celebrity does something weird, that may indeed hurt the product as well. What about Michael Jordan shoes? Are they better? Or will they make you run higher? Run faster? Will they make you jump higher? Absolutely not. Again, we give it greater credibility, but the symbolic nature of communication and value systems is that we hold the Michael Jordan shoe at higher value because we all, a lot of us, have agreed that it has a lot more value. And as a result, it can actually hold more value, even due to the fact that we know, even though we know that it is undue influence acting upon us. Now we move on to move on from perception in total to perceiving others. We perceive others through attribution, interpreting their behavior. What are some of the pet peeves you have? It may be someone picking their nose, maybe someone saying a lot. It could be someone not holding the door, maybe someone acting in some way. Tapping pencils, I think, is another one. Those, we make judgments to explain that behavior. And some of those behaviors that we attributed to those could potentially be inconsiderate, rude, annoying. All of those, keep in mind, are those internal attributions, and we tend to focus on internal attribution over external attribution. Internal attributions, when we attribute behavior to someone's personality, their versus the external attribution of where we attribute their behavior to a situation. So for example, if someone blows by me at 100 miles per hour and I have an internal attribution about that, I would say, you know what, that person's so rude. Oh my goodness. Whereas if I have an external attribution about the situation, I would say, wow, that person must be in a very big rush. They must have somewhere very important to be and are running late. Guess which one we usually do? We usually do internal. The fundamental attribution error states that is a bias that we have that causes us to overemphasize those internal causes and underestimate external causes of behaviors we observe in others. So no matter what they do, if they are acting in some way, we are more likely to focus on the internal causes, their character of it, versus the actual situation. This usually is not right, because guess what? We are affected a lot by our situations. But for us, we have something called the self-serving bias, where we will usually attribute our own successes to internal factors and attribute our own success due to internal factors and attribute our failures due to the external effects. For example, if I were to do a test and I nailed the test, then I would think I'm really smart. Whereas if I were to fail that very same test, I would think the teacher didn't teach me right. Or you know what, that roommate that I have made me go out to Taco Bell and therefore I wasn't able to practice and therefore that is why I failed. How do we improve our perceptions? This is very simple logically, but emotionally it takes a lot more work. Be thoughtful when seeking explanations. Look beyond the most obvious explanation. This involves just taking a pause, giving yourself time to evaluate and think through your reaction. Is the reason why this person just blew right by me because he is rude? Or is it because he has somewhere important to be? Did this person cut me off on purpose? Or is that just me maybe perceiving things wrong? This person driving this huge gas guzzler down the freeway with only one person in it, driving. Is it because they don't care about the environment? Or is it because they usually have more people, they need the cargo space, but today they just aren't using it? So we really have to rethink our reactions, because in every single one of those scenarios, we could potentially make our day a lot more miserable. Because guess what? If we think that every other person on the road, every single other person out there is rude or somehow deficient, that can only hurt us more. Not just from our perceptions on other people, but also how we see ourselves. So we want to be sure that we are looking beyond first impressions, holding off forming judgments until you can gather further perceptions. Guess what? First impressions may not be accurate. So weird. So we want to be sure that we're holding off on those first impressions. Also, question assumptions. Don't assume you know what others think, feel, or believed based on their group affiliations or any other cultural factors. This one is a lot more challenging because right now you have a perception of how the world works, how people think, how people feel, how people believe. And when you start to question these assumptions, it starts to breed uncertainty. And we hate uncertainty. It is an incredibly uncomfortable state to feel like we do not know. But it is the only way that we get to better perceptions, by questioning these long-held assumptions and start to develop new perceptions based off of group affiliations or cultural factors. We live in an incredibly diverse world, and our perceptions need to be a need to adapt to this fact. We must possess an understanding of and appreciation for people who perceive others differently than you. We want to be sure that we are perceiving and giving the benefit of the doubt to people who we may perceive differently. Also important to understand that the way that your background will affect you. How you were raised is absolutely going to affect you. It does a lot of good for you, but it may also give you some short-sightedness in regards to other things. There are perceptual barriers, and this comes a lot from our worldviews and our upbringing. Successful intercultural communication requires mindfulness, respect for others, and accurate perceptions of situations. This is developed through interaction and through respect, through recognition and appreciation for differences of opinions. There are some perceptual challenges to overcome to achieve competent communication, including narrow perspective, stereotyping, and even prejudice. Narrow perspective is also called cultural myopia, where we have short-sightedness. We do not understand other cultures. And we assume that what is true of my culture is also true of other cultures. This is especially dangerous when members of the dominant group in a society are unaware of or are insensitive towards the needs and values of other members in the same society. I have had to check this myself multiple times. I came from a cultural upbringing where I was able to afford computers. I had internet access. I had a ride to school every day. I have a family support system that I am able to rely on when I am feeling emotionally turbulent. However, what I have had to come to understand is that some students, a lot of students, have different situations from me, that even though I may be able to manage this situation very well, someone else might not. A good example of this is one time I gave out an assignment and I was like, okay, you have this week to do it. I thought that was more than enough time. Turns out one person had a job that was literally like 6-7 days a week, and they had to be on call for the majority of it. So I may have been a little bit insensitive towards the needs and values of that member because I didn't understand where they were coming from. Another example of this happened quite a bit during the Hurricane Katrina. One of the perceptions that I had, and I'm not proud of this, is that I thought, why didn't they just move? There's a hurricane coming, move away from the hurricane. But that didn't account for the elderly, people who were not able to move, didn't account for those of lower socioeconomic status where they may not be able to afford a hotel, or maybe even just that they feared getting looted. So it is because of my narrow perspective that I could very easily fall into some of these perceptual challenges. We also have stereotyping. The act of assuming that individuals, because they belong to certain groups, have a set of attitudes, behaviors, skills, morals, and habits. No group is a monolith. No group is meaning that no group has, everyone has the exact same values, beliefs, and behaviors, skills, morals, habits, etc. So it is, we really should try to avoid stereotyping people. This could mean police officers. This could mean even Democrats and Republicans. I find it very interesting that um, the African American community in America is seen as always Democratic. In fact, same as the Hispanic community. But by assuming that those groups are going to just be democratic, that is indeed that stereotyping that we want to try to avoid, because that can then lead to false perceptions and even communicate a lack of regard for someone in that group. By saying that this group is entirely the same, it diminishes someone's individuality. Is stereotyping always negative? I am going to argue yes, because let's say the stereotype that is very, very ridiculous would be that all Mexicans are amazing drivers. Obviously. Then what happens when there is someone of the Mexican community that isn't a good driver? Then they see themselves as they see themselves as maybe deficient, and as a result diminishes their self-esteem or maybe self-concept. In the same way, it also says that that could potentially be just what you will do now. That you are in this box, you have to be a good driver. So stereotyping is something we want to try to avoid. And where this stereotyping gets into bigger challenges is prejudice. This is deep-seated feelings of unkindness and ill will towards particular groups, often accompanied by feelings of superiority over those groups. This, unfortunately, is ingrained within the American culture, that there are people who have deep-seated feelings of unkindness and ill will towards particular groups, and that can potentially lead to violence. So we want to obviously be sure that we are avoiding this sort of situation, and when we feel like we are superior over other groups, we have to check ourselves and see, is this truly warranted, necessary, and it could even potentially diminish and the public forum where we are unable to manage our meanings. In prejudice, what ends up happening is that a lack of communication happens between the two groups. And because of this lack of communication, then those attitudes are only reinforced through their own perceptions and through the perceptions of other like-minded people. We now move on from how we perceive others and the perceptual barriers that we engage in to cognitions about ourselves. There are three important influences on our thoughts about ourselves: our self-concept, who you think you are; your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, good, bad; and self-efficacy, assessing your own abilities in certain situations. Let's jump right in. But before we do that, we're really quickly going to talk about this in perspective. This is self-concept, self-esteem, and self-efficacy would be within the cognition period. So this is going to affect how we decode and how we perceive messages being sent. Self-concept involves who you think you are. your awareness and understanding of who you are as interpreted and influenced by your thoughts, actions, abilities, values, goals, and ideals. Self-concept is developed by thinking about your strengths and your weaknesses. I am very, very good at running. Therefore, I see myself as a runner. If I'm very good at acting, I see myself as an actor. If I see myself being very bad at math, then I may well, I guess that would also be, well, I wouldn't see myself as a mathematician, but this will also potentially also affect other things. Also, observing your behavior in a wide variety of situations. Let's say I go on a run and I blow everyone out of the water. I am first, which I've done only once, and it wasn't even something to be proud of. It was like out of 12 or 13 people in a marathon. I then felt awesome in that situation because my self-concept was developed saying that I'm a good runner because I beat every single other person on this race. Funny to note, I also beat everyone by an hour, so that was legit. Anyway, humble brag. Witnessing your own reactions to situations. So, how do you react in a given situation? So, for example, if I feel like I am a, if I feel like I am a, let's say an environmentalist. If I say I'm an environmentalist and then, or I see myself as an environmentalist, and I then react to say, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous, to a situation where someone is acting in an environmentally friendly way, then that may shake my self-concept. And watching others' reactions to you. Let's say I think that I am very funny and then people don't laugh. Then I think, well, they don't know comedy. But I could also be affected by that. Also, self-concepts can affect how you think about of other people and where you fall within that. Are you of higher power or lower power of the person? Also, how apprehensive you get in certain communication situations. If you are in a math class and you do not see yourself as a mathematician, then of course you are going to be far more apprehensive in that situation. Also, whether you're even willing to interact with others in this situation. A good example of this could be if I feel like I am an introvert, then I may not even engage in an interaction with someone else. And how you even approach someone with a request. If I see myself as someone of lower power, I don't think, maybe I think of myself as the student in this situation, whereas someone else is the teacher, then I may have to accommodate to that person of higher power more by being more polite in that request. Whereas if I were to ask maybe someone on my same level, I may not have to be more polite. Or even if I was more polite, then it may be seen as something that's awkward or weird. Communication determines your self-concept. We have direct evidence and we have indirect evidence. Let's say that if I feel like I am funny, or let's say I think that I am smart, someone may compliment me saying, wow, you're very smart. Now that's reinforcing my self-concept. In the same way, insults would actually diminish that. Support or negative remarks, all of which are direct evidence, either confirming or disconfirming my self-concept, how I see myself. We also have indirect evidence. This is innuendo, gossip, subtle nonverbal cues, or lack of communication altogether that could affect how I see myself as well. Let's say that I think that I am a ladies' man, and I text a lady, and then a lady does not respond back. Then that would probably diminish how I see myself. Probably guide me to a more realistic self-concept. And But we have to be careful about this because we want to be sure that we will always compare ourselves with others based off of our self-concept. But we want to be sure that this is not happening in ways that are unrealistic or d- uh, or diminish us in some way. Social comparison theory states that we are going to compare ourselves based on people who hold a same characteristic of us. For example, people my age. I would then compare myself within that range of how successful I am, of how funny I am, or how smart I am, etc. And that would show my self-concept. This will also, or could also, affect our self-esteem. Because if everyone my age is doing amazing, and then I am of that age and I am not doing amazing, then I could have negative feelings associated with that. So, self-esteem consists of attitudes which are positive and negative feelings we have in a given situation about our appearance, traits, thoughts, whatever. People with high self-esteem have more confidence in what they do, how they think, how they perform, and even in interpersonal relationships. Funny to note, though, PDA, public displays of affection, actually actually have been shown to exist more in relationships with lower self-esteem because people have to show that they're like cared for and that they are in love due to the negative attitudes they may have about themselves. Interesting to note. Low self-esteem can be caused by lack of information about themselves or even mistrusting the information that we do possess. We may think that we are really. Have you ever had a situation where you thought you were really bad at something, then you actually did it and you were actually really good at it? Or even if someone says, wow, you are really good at this activity, you're really good at this video game, but I mistrust it, thinking that this person is just trying to build me up or try to, just be polite, then of course that may cause low self-esteem because I am not taking in that positive feedback. Another example, tying back into social comparison theory, is unrealistic comparisons. Talking about appearance, a lot of people have unrealistic comparisons of how they should look like. This brings me to It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where one character called Mac, he was like very heavy, and then he lost all of this weight and was super shredded. And I was like, wow, he went from super fat to amazingly shredded in like only a year. And he got interviewed about this, and he says, oh yeah, all I had to do was just quit my job, hire a personal trainer, hire a nutritionist, and literally have no fun whatsoever. And not eat anything, really. Does that seem like something that we can reasonably assume for ourselves? Almost certainly not. Guess what? We are students. Our priority should not be looking shredded. Instead, it should be probably our academics, since we are in fact at a college. In the same way, we also have social media. Has anyone ever posted something that has happened negative to them? Oh, I totally failed this test. That's horrible. Or, oh, I got dumped and I understand it was totally my fault. Usually we don't do this. And because it's obvious that we don't do it, it's reasonable to assume that other people don't do it as well. So when we see all of these people on Facebook go into vacations every single day, or, going out for dinner seems every single day, or all of these other crazy fun things that it looks like they're doing, usually that isn't even an unrealistic comparison because it does not account for all of the other time. So we want to be sure that we are managing our expectations and how much stock we are holding in these comparisons. Now we continue with self-esteem. How do you feel when you're receiving a compliment? For me personally, I feel awkward, and that can very easily lead into some poor self-esteem. Because if I am not able to incorporate this success into my self-concept, it will lower my self-esteem and vice versa. Those who have higher self-esteem are better at incorporating their success into their self-concept. So you want to be sure that we are doing this more often. Lastly, we move into self-efficacy. This is assessing our own abilities in situations. The ability to predict actual success from your self-concept to your self-esteem. So, if I feel like I am a good public speaker, I will predict that I am going to be better, I'm going to be successful in this situation. Whereas if I don't feel like I'm going to be a successful public speaker, then I may have low expectations and predict failure. In this, you want to be like Goldilocks. You don't want to be too hot. You don't want to be too cold. You don't want to have such high self-efficacy that you are overconfident in that you don't even have to practice a public speaking situation. Whereas low self-efficacy would make me dwell on my shortcomings. Oh, I'm going to be awful. I'm going to be horrible. You know what? Why even practice? I might as well just work on my other classes. So we want to be sure that we are avoiding both ends of the spectrum. Perceptions of self-efficacy may in fact lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy, where I believe I have an attitude that I'm going to be either successful or not successful, or I'm good or bad at something. That attitude leads to behavior. In the public speaking situation, if I feel like I am going to fail, then I may not practice as much as I would normally. And as a result, that would lead to a specific outcome, which is failure. And therefore, due to that failure, that would reinforce my existing attitude, thereby leading to the self-fulfilling prophecy. Another fun example of this is the forever alone meme, where I feel like I'm going to be forever alone. So I feel like I have low self-efficacy. I will not succeed in a romantic relationship. Therefore, I may be less confident going into romantic relationships. And as a result, I would then fail in the romantic relationship. Cognitions are incredibly powerful in how we see ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, and how well we think we will achieve are going to affect us dramatically. Think to the Stanford prison experiment. For those who don't know, the Stanford prison experiment was an experiment done at Stanford where they simulated a prison. But these people were, at the very beginning of this experiment, put into the role of guard and put into the role of prisoner. And the guards, due to this self-concept, they then acted in ways towards the prisoners that they were not supposed to, and in fact were incredibly dehumanizing and malicious and aggressive, even though the parameters of the study said that they should not do these things. But it was the perceptions that they had about themselves, as well as the self-esteem associated with that, If I am in an incredibly high power position in relation to the majority of my social interactions, then of course I'm going to feel pretty dang good. But we have to be sure that we are checking these because it led to disastrous results where I believe it was supposed to be a 1-month study, lasted only a week. They had to stop the experiment because people were starting to experience mental health issues. People who were going to Stanford, who were seen as very with it, very mature, very emotionally intelligent, were then dehumanized and some were even on the verge of mental breakdowns. So, the full model as it exists with cognitions and behavior and assessment. We've talked about cognitions. These are our self-concept, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. These are going to lead into behavior of how we self-present and how we self-disclose. We are then going to get feedback from those disclosures, and we will then assess how we did in that communication situation, and as a result, that will be reincorporated into our cognition. We go into communicating our identity. We communicate our identity through self-presentation and self-disclosure. Self-presentation is intentional communication designed to show elements of the self for strategic purposes. Guess what? In an interview, you are going to put your best foot forward. In the same way, you are also going to be highly strategic in how you present yourself on a first date, in a friend relationship, in a big social gathering, and anything of the like. This requires self-monitoring, which is the ability to watch your environment and others for cues on how you should present yourself in the situation. High self-monitors, they try to look for hints and how to be successful in the social situations as much as possible. So they are looking for they're looking at, oh, okay, well, how am I acting? And then they will continue to act in that way. This can very easily turn into something negative, where we may overly analyze the situation and therefore not feel confident in the situation. Low self-monitors, and also in high self-monitoring situations, if you are too high self-monitoring, it could show that you are not acting like yourself. You should still be authentic. Low self-monitoring is not being sensitive to the situational cues and that prescribe the communication behavior. In other words, acting like yourself regardless of the situation. This is bad too because you could be seen and perceived in a negative way based off of how you are not adapting to the situation. Be like Goldilocks. Not too high self-monitoring, not too low self-monitoring. Now we move into the next part of how we present our identity, self-disclosure. When self-disclosure is when you reveal yourself to others by sharing information about yourself. We do this to build connection because I am giving you information, and when you hold on to that information, that shows trust. We can improve our self-esteem or confirm our self-concept. It can also enable us to obtain reassurance from a friend. So for example, let's say that I feel very ashamed about all of my student debt and all of my credit card debt and all my car loans and all these things. I am super into debt. And I disclose that to a friend. And my friend says, me too. I have this debt as well. Oh, I now feel better about it because he has it as well. Also, I've confirmed myself or disconfirmed my self-concept that I'm not good with money. And I have obtained reassurance from my friend that I'm still doing okay. So I feel glad about it, and therefore now we go out on a shopping spree. Obviously. How you incorporate feedback into yourself depends on your sensitivity level. Sensitivity level is people's sensitivity to feedback, and this can vary from person to person, not just in how our sensitivity level in general, but even where we are getting this information from. If I think that I'm funny and I have a low sensitivity level and someone says you're not funny, then I say you can't take a joke. I did not incorporate that feedback into my self-concept. Whereas if I did have a high sensitivity level in this relationship or in this or just in general, then I would say, oh, I guess I'm not funny. I'd incorporate that into my self-concept. So we've talked about self-concept, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. Due to all the thoughts we have about ourselves, we act in certain ways. We present ourselves and we disclose information that shows who we are, but also can confirm some of the ideas we have about ourselves. Another thing to keep in mind is that this behavior, self-presentation, and especially self-disclosure, are incredibly vulnerable acts. It is incredibly vulnerable to say, to disclose any information about myself, because if I disclose something, then you could give me negative feedback on that, and that can change my cognition. But self-disclosure as well as self-presentation are incredibly important because that is how we form relationships. It is how we show who we are so that people can identify with us and we can form into these relationships. But we get feedback from others. This can be positive feedback, this can be negative feedback, this can be somewhere in between. And due to this, we assess the perceptions of ourself in three ways: through self-actualization, self-adequacy, and self-denigration. So it allows us to assess our strengths and weaknesses. An evaluation of expectations, solutions, and outcomes can be done in three ways: self-actualization, self-adequacy, and again, self-denigration. Self-actualization is the feeling and thoughts you get when you know you have negotiated a communication situation as well as you possibly could have. I absolutely nailed that presentation. I am awesome. Oh, I had this rough conflict with my sister the other day, but I negotiated it so well. I am a very good communicator. Next time I go into a conflict like that, I am going to act more confidently because that will hopefully be incorporated into my self-concept. Self-adequacy is when you assess your communication competence as sufficient or acceptable. This can lead to contentment towards a desire or toward a desire for self-improvement. I like to think of the Raiders in this way, that, you know what, they fumbled only 5 times, at least they're improving. This may also be to that family member or person who you have to interact with where you didn't communicate as well as you could have, but you know what? I did better than I thought I did, so I think that that's pretty good. This may be to that family member you meet at Thanksgiving who's that insane family member who believes that the earth is flat and that vaccines cause autism. At that point, you interact with them, you try your best, but a contentment towards a contentment of the interaction could potentially be fine. And then we get into self-denigration. Self-denigration is criticizing or attacking yourself. I just didn't do as well as I would like. I failed. I'm awful. I'm horrible. This occurs often when communicators overemphasize their weaknesses and shortcomings. I am horrible at public speeches, and I failed in that public speech so bad. We all tend to have that idea, but it's usually unnecessary, unwarranted, and actually prevents real improvement. we are less likely to improve, because if we continue to criticize and attack ourselves, we will be less likely to engage in this interaction again, and as a result, I will not get better. So we definitely want to avoid self-denigration. Keep in mind that someone who is amazing at something could still engage in self-denigration, even if they are an amazing singer or an amazing communicator, or thought that were very funny and everyone laughed, but they didn't think they got as many laughs as they should have. They could potentially still be in self-denigration and therefore hurt their self-concept and self-esteem, even though they shouldn't. So this is the full model, and from this assessment, we then incorporate this information back into our self-concept. Last thing I'm going to add to this is technology. They manage the self and perception. Technologically mediums for behavior allow a great deal more control in presentation of self than in face-to-face encounters. Guess what? I can be 15 pounds thinner on Facebook or a dating app or whatever. I could also be the smartest and have the most clear ideas on social media or technological mediums, but in face-to-face encounters, it is more spontaneous, and as a result, I have less control over these situations. Also, statements made by your friends on social media can significantly affect people's impressions of you. So, if your mom or dad are following you, let's say as you enter the college life, and you have a buddy who posts on your Facebook, or I guess Facebook isn't cool anymore, Twitter or Instagram, whoa, we totally raged last night, and you got super hyped up on that soda we were drinking, then that the parent may have a different impression of you based off of what that friend has said. That concludes perception and the self. Have a great day.